Welcome, everybody. I hope everyone's having a great day so far. My name's Meg. I am part of Power to Fly's virtual hosting team, and I am really excited to be here with you today for this great event. And before we get started, though, I just want to highlight a couple quick housekeeping items in case any of you are new to a Power to Fly event. So we'll go through these as quickly as we can, and then we will jump into our questions and get you introduced to our speaker today. So first things first is we want you all to understand that these events don't happen without you. They are all about you guys, all about our attendees and our community members, and making sure that you make the most out of today's time. So to that end, you are more than welcome to participate. You can do that in a couple different ways. You are always welcome and encouraged to turn your cameras on if you'd like. Please do not feel pressure to be, Instagram perfect. If you are rocking a 4-day messy bun or working in a non-traditional workspace or have furry coworkers that are with you, please feel free to join us. Just know that we are very interested in meeting you where you are. Now, if you do have any concerns about privacy, just know that if you do come off mute, you will show up on the live recording of today's event. So if you do want to ask a question or add a comment during today's session and you want to do so via audio, that's totally fine. Just message me. I will give you the permissions to be able to come off mute and ask a question. Now, if you don't want to come off mute or you don't want to be seen on camera, you want to be, super secret, be able, but still be able to participate, that is great. You can always add questions or comments into the group chat in Zoom. And if you have a question that you'd like to ask, but you want to remain totally anonymous, that is totally fine. Just DM me your question. You'll find Meg Alexander on the dropdown. Instead of sending your question to everyone, you'll just DM me. I'm happy to keep, ask your questions or raise your comments and keep you anonymous. Now, like I did say, today's session is being recorded. So we are currently live streaming to our YouTube channel. Hi, YouTube, as well as to our website. And one thing to know is that, because we are recording today's event, it's nice because then you don't feel like you have to take notes or worry if you missed something. You can always go back and watch the recording later. And especially if Sharna says something today that is just mind-blowing, you cannot wait to share it with a coworker or a relative or a friend, you do not have to wait. So what's going to happen is this recording is going to be posted to our YouTube channel in about my bad guys. It's going to be posted to our YouTube channel, usually within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of today's live stream. But the other thing that's cool is even if you registered, but you weren't able to join us today, everybody that registered is going to get an email from us. It's going to come in about 1 to 2 business days, and it'll have a link to where you can rewatch this recording on our website. Now, like I said, if you don't want to wait that long, you don't have to. You can always head over to our YouTube channel and check out the video there. There's also a ton of content posted there from our a lot of other previous chat and learn events. So I definitely recommend that if you want to check out more stuff from us, I really recommend that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a really awesome way to make sure that you don't miss out on events like today, even if maybe you didn't know they were going on or you weren't able to register in time. So please feel free to check us out there. You can also keep up with us on various social media channels. We are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as YouTube. And please feel free to take pictures or video as we go. Let your friends or your social networks know that you are learning with Power to Fly today. We'd love to be able to retweet or reshare your posts so that we can grow the community. Really make sure that these valuable resources are available to everyone, since we are we want people to have this information. So please feel free to do that. Now, last but not least, before we get started, I do just want to introduce our speaker to you. So Sharna Fabiano is an artist, coach, and author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. Her long study of improvisation and partnering has made her a specialist in the Argentine tango, for which she is recognized internationally. And as someone who dances with enthusiasm, but not much skill, I'm incredibly jealous of this. So way to go, Sharna. Sharna designs interactive and memorable team development programs and is on the coordinating council for Teaching Followers Courage, which is an international community of scholars and practitioners pioneering the practice of followership alongside that of leadership. So Sharna, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us today. Is there anything that you would like to add to this description or add to this bio before we jump into the questions?
Just want to say thank you so much, Meg, and I'm really happy to be here and excited to talk about leading and following.
Awesome. All right, so last thing before we jump into questions. What you can see on the screen today are some of the principal themes for today's conversation. Now, we identified these both by speaking with Sharna, as well as by looking at the questions that you all submitted during the registration portion of today's, leading up to today's event. So one thing that I want to make sure that y'all understand is that these are some of the high points we're going to try and hit today. But if you are here live, if you, know, not that we don't have love for future watchers, hi from the past, but if you are here live and you took time out of your day to be with us during today's live recording, we want to make sure that the time that you spend with Power to Fly is well worth it. So one thing to know is that if you have questions, even if you submitted a question prior to today's event, if you're worried that we won't get to it, just know that you are very, very much encouraged to ask that question again if you would like, or share with us and let us know, if you want us to dig in deeper on a certain topic or something like that. So like I said, we're going to try and cover these topics, but just know that you all have the power to drive today's conversation. So we're going to speak a little bit about how understanding the concept of active followership can help groups to be more collaborative. We're going to discuss what a healthy flow of leading and following actually looks like in practice, since that can sometimes be very different from, industry to industry or team to team. And we're also going to look a little bit about how strengthening followership skills in yourself and others, how you can do that for, like we said, yourself as well as the people around you. So to dive into our first question today, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we started with was kind of diving a little bit deeper into the concept of active followership. So Sharna, could you elaborate a little bit on what that, what that concept means, or what are some of the baseline things that people should understand about this concept?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to also just let everyone know I have a couple of notes here on my screen. So if you see my eyes going a little bit to the side, that's what I'm looking at. I just want to make sure that I give you really useful information today. So as we know, when we hear the word follower or followership, there's kind of like an internal cringe. There's still this little bit of a stigma, a negative stereotype around the idea of being a follower. And so that is, that's something to be aware of, right? We just think of it as a sort of passive, unthinking, like blind obedience role. But leadership, on the other hand, has kind of a positive stereotype, right? When we talk about leadership, we assume that we're talking about something good, something positive. And so most of us have internalized this kind of positive, negative binary, with like leading and following. And dancers think of that really differently. Like dancers have a positive idea of both roles. So what I would propose here to answer this question is just to realize that there can be also negative leadership, right? There's plenty of poor and destructive leadership out there, but we don't think about that when we talk about leadership. And likewise, on the other side, there are tons of instances of really strong supportive followership. We just don't think about it. So if we kind of reframe our thinking so that we understand there can be positive and negative leadership and positive and negative followership, the active part is, usually on the positive end of the followership scale. So, how are you embodying your role when you're the leader? How are you embodying your role when you're the follower, right? You can choose to be intentional and active about it, or you can be passive and, not participatory. And you can do that from both the follower side and the leader side. That's kind of a general framework, just to kind of, give us a broad way of thinking about it.
I love that. And you're right. I mean, when you think of these things, you tend to think of maybe the better examples of them, or maybe the more ideal examples. But yeah, you're right. I do love that general idea of passivity versus being proactive about something. So yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that for us. All right, so you said that, a lot of us may already be in situations where active followership or active leadership are being, kind of being deployed. If we aren't, can you talk about some of the most common changes to the roles or responsibilities for team members as a result of implementing this? Because I know that, like you said, we might be in more, more effective leadership or more effective team scenarios or less effective. But if you are in one of those less effective ones, what kind of changes would be something that you would see?
Sure. So I'll start with something pretty broad and then maybe give us some examples. So I think probably if you think back in your mind, you can remember a moment when you were in a really great team experience, right? So in a way, if you can remember a moment when everything was going well, everyone's work was flowing together, communication was open, that's probably a place you had already good leading and following energy going on, no matter what the formal roles were. But when things get sticky, or when communication is not so good, or when just things aren't happening, there's misunderstandings, that's where I think it's useful to start reflecting on like, what's the balance, here. And what I've seen when I work with teams is that there's a general tendency for, again, because of our bias toward leadership and thinking leader-centrically, is for those in leadership positions to be doing too much, to try to take on too much responsibility, too much pressure, too much literally time and work. And then the tendency is for those who don't have a formal leadership role is to not do enough, to do less, to do, not to step up, not to kind of take initiative. And so when teams start to reflect on like, how can we adjust this balance? What tends to happen is that those in leadership roles actually do a little less, right? Their job gets a little easier. And those in followership roles do a little bit more. Now that looks different, of course, depending on your context, but the balance of work and responsibility shifts a little bit so that there's less pressure on the leader, right? And more, I wouldn't say more pressure on the followers or on the team members, but there's more initiative. There's more, their job gets more interesting, right? And more complex because they're doing more within their sphere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great way to kind of dial it down and see what that might look like and what those changes that you could see might be. Because I feel like a lot of people, if they don't have a great understanding of what this change could do for them, it can feel a lot more intimidating to try and go down this path, because not only are you not sure what the changes might look like, it's hard to throw yourself into into making these changes if you're unsure and if you're maybe worried about where it's going to take you. Now, in your experience, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about this team dynamic of equal and active followership and leadership?
I think that the biggest misconception probably comes from what you're mentioning, this sort of reticence to make a change. Like, it's whatever we're doing, even if it's not great, it's familiar. So, when someone says, followership is this new thing, there's a little bit of fear of change, right? Period. But then I think after that, there's generally a sense that talking about followership will somehow threaten leadership authority or will take away something from the leadership role, which is kind of the opposite, right? In my experience, if you imagine the dance partnership, right? It's useful, I think, because you have two people, right? And a team is more. So if you think of just two people, like a leader and a follower, the presence of the follower and the follower partner, giving their energy and their style and their positive goodwill doesn't take anything away from the job of the leader. We still need the leader there to navigate, to make decisions. So it's not a subtraction. It's like an addition and a clarification, right? And ideally, like if you're embodying your follower role, like intentionally, the whole point is to support the shared goal, right? And so it makes the leader's job easier. It doesn't like remove the need for leadership, but I think that is one of the misconceptions, like that either will lose authority or lose control or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's one of the main concerns, right? Is that you, especially as a leader, maybe don't necessarily want to be questioned on certain things, but I think you're right. From a follower position, it can also seem like if you are to take a more active role, that could be that could be detracting from the leadership that your team lead, your manager, whatever is trying to do. So I can totally understand how it might feel like, well, I better be more hands off in order to be more helpful, but it might not be the case, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just speaking to the fact that we don't have fleshed out what followership means. We've been schooled for like 40 years now by the leadership industry to believe that everyone should be a leader all the time, right? But if you think about that in terms of a meeting, like what if everyone tried to lead at once? Like what if right now Meg and I both tried to ask questions at the same time, right? That would not work. So the reality is that followership is not just one thing, right? Followership can be attentive listening, like right now, you are all being exceptional followers for what I can tell, right? You're listening to this conversation. And if you weren't doing that, my words would be worthless. So that's, one very simple manifestation of good following is being there to receive, communication information. So yeah, I think there's that tendency to think, oh, if we have active followership, that's just going to be like another leader, but it's not leading. I think that's the main thing to get is like following is not leading, right? It's a very different thing, and it makes leading better, it makes leading easier, right? Just like that good listener, right? Or that best friend who you call up and say, I have this crazy idea. What do you think? Your friend's going to be like, oh, I like it. What about X? Have you thought of Y? Right? That is good following, right? It's not like your friend being like, well, that's a terrible idea. You should do my idea instead, right? So active following is profoundly supportive. It makes ideas better. It makes decisions better. Like this is the whole point of it, right? Is that bringing in this role is a complement to leadership.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I had asked a question to the audience in the chat, asking if they think that they're in a positive or negative leadership dynamic and to let us know. Let's see, V Ferguson had commented saying, right now, I'm definitely in a positive leadership dynamic, but before this, I wasn't, and it affected my work, my mental health, as well as my growth. We also got a comment from Alejandro Franco saying, yes, I think that there are negative leaderships when more care about control and power than making things work and being collaborative to get to that goal. And I absolutely agree. It's one of those things where you kind of have to have everybody not necessarily focused on the same thing, but like with an understanding of what their role is in moving towards that success. Not everybody's like steering the ship, but everybody that's there is contributing to, the forward momentum of getting where you want to go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think being intentional in how you show up as a follower is sort of asking yourself that question, is the question of how can I best contribute right now? Right. And realizing that that's as valuable as whatever the person leading is doing. Right. And in fact, the person leading needs you to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the best way I can describe active following is like being very sincere and like in determining what from your skills, from your perspective can contribute and make this better. And sometimes the contribution is like, could be a challenging question, could be, I'm not sure about that. Have you thought about this? Or I see where you're coming from, but in my department, we have this data and that means might be dangerous. That's also active following, responsible following and partnering to the leader. It can just take a lot of forms, but I think how can I contribute is a great way to get at it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, to be fair, this was a question that we were asked, and I am also very interested in this response as well. So from what seems to be maybe an American-centric point of view, this person had asked, why do we use the term followership when being a follower is sometimes seen as a bad thing, especially in American culture? We have a lot of phrasing around, don't be a lemming or blindly following people and how that kind of leads to perceived negative consequences. Do you think that the terminology around it is intent on breaking down some of these kind of stereotypes? Or is there maybe a different way to explain it to somebody who might have that negative immediate impression of something like being a follower?
Yeah, sure. And this is probably the number one question I get about this topic because it's so strong, because that no one wants to be the stereotype of a follower. And here's what I would say. If you are in a great team that's working well and you're completely fulfilled and you don't need this word, great. I'm not like here on a crusade, right, to introduce the vocabulary. But what I have noticed and what increasingly research shows is that we again have these like 40 plus years now of leadership materials that have been trying to address the same problems using other terms, using other approaches, individual contributor, team member, tribe member, whatever it is. And we have the same problems, right? We still have the burnout, we still have the conflict, we still have the retention issue, we still have the engagement issue. Basically, nothing has changed. And so, I've been convinced based on my own, study of this topic and experimenting with it with clients, that this is the blind spot, right? This followership is the blind spot because only the term follower, as stigmatized as it is the equivalent of leader, is the opposite, is the complement. There's no other term in English. And here's where the dance metaphor is so useful, because you would never go to a room of people and say, okay, everyone's going to learn the leader role and then we're done. Right?
Yeah,
that would
that's
never
a really
work.
Good point.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have to have both. And in the dance world, I realize that's a very small sample, but both of these terms are very positive. I mean, it's not perfect, right? There's bias there like there is everywhere, but still.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, apple and orange isn't a great idea, or isn't a great concept for it. But yeah, I get what you mean, where it's really just describing the two halves of the partnership. You can't just say like, you could go with like partner A or partner B, but functionally, yeah, within the dance metaphor, one person has to lead and the other person has to follow. Mm-hmm. If both people are following or both people are leading, it's not going to be a good dance, especially in like a competition sense. So yeah, I love that. We actually have a lot of questions coming in from the chat, so I want to make sure we try and get to those. Alejandra said, I'd like to know, when we face this kind of negative leadership in a company, but it looks like what they're trying to ask is if there's a specific person that seems to be contributing to maybe that roadblock or the bottleneck kind of thing that you had talked about, especially if somebody is kind of integral in that communication channel. What can team members do in that position? If you've got someone among you who is kind of throwing a wrench into the works, but you are also not in a leadership capacity.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding. So this is like a team environment where there's a person, so there's maybe like a fellow employee, like someone on a kind of equal level who's bottlenecking communication.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. And Alejandra, please feel free to give us additional context in the chat if we're not understanding this correctly. But yeah, what would you do if you were in that position?
I think there's I sometimes, we think of hierarchy. So we have, most of our organizations are still in some sort of hierarchy, but we also have networks. So in addition to this sort of, pyramid type of structure, we also have something that's more multi-directional, for lack of a better word. So imagine that you're in you're in a company, and everyone is potentially someone you could communicate with. So thinking that way, I guess my first impulse is like, well, okay, what other channels can you explore? Like, are other people having this experience? Where else, maybe outside the direct, established chain of command, so to speak, can communication flow? And I know it's not a very satisfying answer because it's kind of general, but I think without more information, that's how I would start to think about it. It's like, okay, where else could I reach out to address this? What other people?
Yeah,
even if it's not the established way.
Oh yeah, well, and it looks like from Alejandra's follow-up comment is that the person that's the roadblock is important and is the person that communicates between these different areas. So you're right, you do have somebody who's kind of a linchpin of the dynamic, who's not communicating or not leading as well as maybe they should be. So yeah, that does sound like a very sticky situation. Would you still recommend that they explore outside options, or is this maybe a situation where somebody else that's in leadership should be brought in?
Yeah, hard to say again without diagnosing the entire ecosystem. I think that some options would be, should be, one option might be communicating with a different person in leadership, right? If there is a kind of hierarchical relationship, is that would be one. Another one might be speaking with other people who are involved in the same team, like in the same relationship with that person. Approaching the person is an option. Again, all these things are sort of dependent on like what's happened before and the nature of the relationship. But like a lack of clarity is one thing. A lack of communication, period, is something a little different. So I would approach those differently. Like if there's just no communication at all, like that's a different kind of, that's a request. Like, hey, I would like this, asking questions, basically about the information you need, and being more persistent about that. And if it's more like this is vague communication, it's not clear, then the approach is more like,
what can we do to maybe dial this in a little more, or this is how these things are coming across as unclear.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. That's a very important thing. If you are going to try and, tackle this issue or this bottleneck from a different angle, or by having to bring in somebody else or talk to outside personnel, then it is really important to as closely as you can really dial in on what you think the issue is. Because otherwise, like you said, there's kind of there's a myriad of choices about how to start handling that. But if you haven't even really identified the exact problem yet, it makes those choices a lot more difficult or a lot less clear.
One more thing I would add there, and this is again something that applies to a lot of communication breakdowns, is the idea that if people are not feeling connected, then like nothing else is really going to work. So there's something else that I've learned a lot from dancers, which I see over and over again, like applies really well in the workplace, is that if you're on the dance floor and a leader is like, go right, and your follower like steps left, then obviously something's gone wrong. So the response of the dancer is always to stop and reconnect. And reconnect on the dance floor means it's a physical thing. You're tuning into each other, you're reestablishing your embrace. But in the workplace, it's the same thing, right? If things are not being communicated well, there's probably a lack of connection somewhere. So that is always a good thing to check. It's not always the answer, but often it can, smooth things over. So connection could be like, just want to check in, see how you're doing. If it's a leader, you can say, I want you to make sure I'm here to support you. Is there anything I can do to support you? That's unusual, like to offer to a leader, but sometimes that can make a difference. So being creative about connecting and noting in yourself if you feel disconnected, like emotionally from a person, that very likely could cause, problems like down the line in more like routine, day-to-day types of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I just want to encourage everybody. We have we have 30 minutes left in today's chat. So if you want to do that, oh, sorry, y'all, hold on. I'm gonna do my share screen here. There we go. Okay, so one thing I want to show here, oh, sorry, I realized I just pulled up the wrong thing. So hold on a sec, there you go. One thing I want to do here is highlight kind of the next question that we had been asked, which was really, really interesting. This person had wanted to know if it is possible to establish this type of dynamic in a team from the bottom up, or is it crucial to get buy-in from senior leadership so that they can, really help to solidify and implement this kind of new team dynamic. Have you seen this work well in either direction, or have you only seen it implemented in certain ways in your career?
I think the answer is definitely both, right? So I work with a lot of individuals, and they are certainly experimenting with making changes just on their own, like how they are showing up, as followers. And I've seen pretty radical changes just from that, like based on the individual person and their boss, right? So one of my clients, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, he realized, I actually haven't told my boss what I want. in my career right now, or what's important to me, in this stage. And so he did that, said, can we talk? I have some things I want to share with you. And just him doing that resulted in a totally new opportunity. He's now like spearheading this new and training initiative, right, in the HR department, something he loves and cares about. So that, that's an example of just an individual follower. I mean, and he's also like a vice president of training. So like he is also a leader, right? But in relation to his supervisor, he was being the follower. And so bringing that thing that's important to him to the leader allowed then her to make a decision to help him. So that's one example of, purely bottom up, no big buy-in necessary. However, I think it would be naive to say that all things can be fixed with individual action alone, right? Just like any other sort of big social movement, right? So, in the case where a senior leadership team decides, okay, we're all going to do this together, obviously that is going to have a faster, like more widespread effect. So like a nonprofit team I worked with, the director said, okay, I want us all to do this together. And so we, met together and talked about it, and they learned from each other, realized, we are not connected in this particular project, right? We're not as a team connecting with our contractor staff, and we've skipped that part. And that's why we're having these misunderstandings down the line. And so like they discovered something almost diagnostically, right, about a large summer program, right, they were running, that then they could all change, kind of cascade through all of their protocols, right, to change it. So that's like a systemic change. And I think that kind of thing obviously only happens if you have a lot of people doing the same kind of thinking together.
No, I think you're right. It's very important that you have not necessarily just one person trying to make this happen. We do have a comment and a follow-up question here from Amy. Amy says, having been in a partnership as a creator of a product, we were both leaders and very ambitious and active within that creation. But I'd like to hear your thoughts about how two leaders play leader and follower in different times during a project, or if that dynamic is even possible. And then they have a follow-up question, but we'll tackle that next. So do you think it's possible for, in a duo relationship to have kind of that give and take between who plays leader and who plays follower? Do you think that dynamic is possible?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's essential. I don't think anything good happens otherwise. Again, think of the dance partnership, right? If you have two, say you have two highly skilled dancers, right? And they have both studied the leader role and the follower role, right? Which are different but compatible skill sets, right? If you put them together, one of them has to do one role and one of them has to do the other one, right? At one time. They can switch, right? You could have partner A start out leading, partner B start out following, and then 30 seconds later, they're switching roles, right? And high performing dancers do that, and it's exhilarating to watch. And I think the same thing happens with two very skilled, business people in any industry, right? And who may have had many leadership roles, who may identify themselves as industry leaders or company leaders. I think the key is to realize that within us, we have both of those modes that we can enter. So, if I'm collaborating with another artist, for example, and again, even the conversation metaphor is really useful. I'm going to say, I have this great idea, and I'm not going to just keep talking, right? Like I want them to respond, right? And I might recognize them as an expert in their field, right? Say I'm the dancer, they're the musician, we're having a collaboration. I want their expertise and leadership on the music side, right? And they want my expertise and leadership on the dance side. So in any great collaboration, there is, I think, inherently that back and forth and like the ability to slip, leader, follower, maybe even minute to minute or like week to week or project to project. That is how great things happen. And so, the follower skills are again in service of the leader skills. And on the leader side, and this might be helpful just for context, I put things like vision, decision-making, wide-ranging communication. And on the follower side, you put things like attentive listening, right? Questions, like challenging questions, open-ended questions, performing, like delivering things, right? Doing the work is like the follower side, the details. So you have like big picture versus like every day. So we both have both of, it's like the two left and right brain. We both have those two things. Thank you. Yeah, and this gives you a little cliff notes of how I think about this. And so, I mean, I think yes, yes to the question. Hopefully I've answered it, maybe a little bit overkill, but yeah, you can see here on the screen, there's these two columns to give you a little idea of how I think these modes of communication go together.
There we go. Sorry, so sorry, y'all. It took me a minute to figure out how to make sure I was sharing this so everybody could read it. Yeah, I absolutely love this. And just so y'all are aware, we will be sharing this in the follow-up email. So in that rewatch email that you get from Powerfly, we will make sure this is attached to it. But yeah, I love kind of the idea of breaking down what that looks like for both parties. And really how those, kind of the responsibilities or the skills that you're trying to flex are slightly different for each. I think that's really awesome. And I love this visual because, I know a lot of people were really, really loving the dance metaphor because it kind of puts that, in a really clear context that a lot of people can understand. So I absolutely love this diagram that you've put together.
Yeah. The easy one there is like structure and delivery. I think it's pretty easy to see that, like the leader mind, so to speak, would be like organizing the work, like a timeline or, a project plan. And then the delivery is like the follower brain, which is, okay, I need to execute these individual things. But that's just a quick, easy example.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to leave this up for about a couple seconds more. If you want to take a screen grab of it, please feel free. But like I said, we will be sharing this as part of the rewatch email for all of our registrants. So we had a lot of people that wanted to kind of know how to get the ball rolling on something like this. If you think this is something that you want to implement into your business relationships, or even if it's maybe personal relationships when it comes to working on side projects or philanthropic efforts, anything else. So what are some of the steps that someone should take if they are trying to implement or trying to get started on this process?
Mm-hmm. I think I'll answer that from the perspective of the individual, just because I'm not sure what the context of the question is. So it's, again, like I said before, a little different if you're doing this on your own versus, as a team or as an organization. But from the individual perspective, and you can see this on the skill sheet as well, the first phase of collaboration building is connection. And so the first thing I would say is to reflect on how connected you feel to the people that you work with. And by connected, like think of that as like a really embodied feeling. Like, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel at ease around people that you work with? What's your level of comfort and familiarity? And, if they're people you don't feel connected to in that way, by that definition, what can you do to increase that? What can you do to feel more connected to them? Because that's kind of the foundation of everything. So step 2 might be then to think about your current relationship with your own supervisor. Like, how are you showing up as a follower? Because and I'm emphasizing the following because that's the thing we're less familiar with. So get a really clear sense of what you do when you're in the following role. And that will give you a lot of, clues around how you might want to talk about it with other people. And also might give you some subtle clues around what you might want to change. Like my client who decided, oh, I haven't told my supervisor what I want. I should do that. So if you're showing up continuously with your manager or your supervisor in a certain way and not getting what you want, there might be some changes there. You again, ask yourself, how can I contribute? Or like, what do I want this person to know? What's important to me in this relationship? Things like that. And then maybe step 3 is think about, where you don't have good communication right now, or like, where do you feel uncomfortable, or where do things not work? And usually when that's happening, the balance is off somehow. Like either the leading is not there, or the following is not there, or, the distribution of tasks there is not really balanced. So based on the step 1 and 2, you might, by the time you start thinking about the friction points, you might have some ideas of how to address those, whether it's like, do we need more connection? Do I need to be clearer? Do I need to be less involved even, sometimes. And that skill sheet is good to just sort of start to think about, like, okay, where might I make an adjustment? Do I need more leading in this relationship, or do I need more following? Sometimes it's just as simple as that.
Yeah, for sure. So we are getting a couple of comments from people in the chat wanting to know if I can share the doc again. So I am going to share my screen, and that way y'all can still go back and screenshot that if you'd like. Hopefully that's big enough for y'all. I'm watching the YouTube live stream, and it does look to be large enough, but I am happy to scroll through in case that's any something people want. We did have a comment from a couple different people saying that the document is wonderful for a lot of reasons, but they especially like the point of how followership is not a degraded position, like a downgrade from being the leader. And I think you're right. Like, I really love that point that the attendee made, because you need both people. You can't be a leader if you have no followers. You can't be a follower if no one is actually leading where you're going or helping direct where you and your team members are going. So yeah, I think that's really, a really great point that this person made. We did have a really good question in the chat as well. Jessica had said, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how to be an effective follower when a leader is very emotionally reactive. Most suggestions or cautions are taken personally and often dismissed or shut down. It can be very difficult to contribute when any contribution is reacted against. And I do see a lot of people in the chat, very, very strong, visible reactions to this question. And it is, it's a really good question to ask, because there's a lot of unfortunately leaders that do this. And sometimes it's about maybe the teams or their experiences, but a lot, it can also be completely unrelated to anything that's going on at the time. So, what would you suggest as someone who is in the followership position? What steps they can take, or maybe where they should go if that is the situation that they're faced with. Have you encountered this in your, in your work history or in your practice?
Sure. I mean, humans, they're funny creatures. Yeah, I think I wanted to say, like, right at the beginning here, that it's sometimes you can't fix it. Right. And I want to be realistic about that. Like, we can't control other people. So ultimately, every human is responsible for themselves. Right. And sometimes it's not within your power, right, to completely fix the relationship. So having said that, I think in a situation like that, depending on the context, I'll just kind of throw out some thoughts here to maybe stimulate others thinking. Establishing that you support the leader. Like, leader often, again, I don't know with this situation, but sometimes leaders are under a lot of pressure, right? And insecure, unsure themselves. I mean, again, in this situation, in the society we live in, a lot falls on the leader. So starting with that level of empathy, as counterintuitive as it might sound, can give you some creative ideas. Like, okay, this person is hyper reactive, right? There must be a reason for it. It's not my fault. This is just the way this person is right now. So starting from that point of view, trying to help the person, trying to support the person, rather than seeing them as an adversary. Asking questions is never a bad idea. Sometimes, because we've all been schooled in leadership so much, our language sounds leader-like, and that can be threatening, right? So I had a client who was dealing with this exact thing, right? Where in her mind, she would go to the manager and say, like, something like, here's my idea, can we get clarity on this, right? And it was like, just her language was like leader-like. And that leader was very reactive, right? And so we experimented with changing her language to sound more like a follower, which again does not mean lesser. It just means different. It means more supportive. So she asked more questions. You know, what are you looking for here? How can I support you? How can I, you know, what do you need, you know, for next Wednesday? So little changes of language might be something to play with. Like, are you feeling like a leader in this mode? Are you speaking that way? Or are you speaking genuinely from a place of support? Might soften that relationship a little bit.
Yeah, it really reminds me of something that I learned in therapy actually for like interpersonal relationships, but you know, especially when you're not quite sure how something is going to be taken, or even you know you have something you want to talk about with the other person, but you're worried your words are going to be taken incorrectly, or that you know you're going to send the wrong impression before you can really explain yourself. For me, I personally find it very helpful of going in and saying, hey, I want to talk to you about this. I'm not trying to question you. And I really want you to understand that I'm trying to support your, you know, the direction that you want us to take, or support what you've, you know, what you've decided are our roles. Can we talk a little bit about this? Because I'm unclear on some stuff and I want to make sure I'm executing this, you know, the way you would like it to happen, or that we can, you know, figure out a way to make sure that we get the success that we're aiming for. You know, for me, it sometimes feels kind of clunky, but it's a lot easier to call out directly. Like, I don't mean this to sound disrespectful. I'm going to do my best to make sure it doesn't. Just please know that you know, maybe my words aren't going to match the tone that I'm going for, but how can I help you with this? So it might not be well received, but it's always an option, just so that you can kind of gain yourself at least a little bit of room to talk about it, and less experience, hopefully, with that, you know, kind of knee-jerk reaction. Lacey also made a very good point in the thread, saying oftentimes it's something that the leader is missing within themselves, like self-confidence, that causes this type of reaction. And, you know, Sharna, I can't agree with you strongly enough. We can't control other people.
Yeah.
We can only do our best. And after a certain point, it's no longer really on you. You've done what you can do to try and make sure that this is coming across clearly. And you're, you know, trying to work towards something proactive and you know, impactful for the group. But, you know, trying your best is all that can be asked of you. If you can't make this clear to somebody who either still doesn't understand or doesn't want to really see that, or doesn't want to give you that benefit of the doubt, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, and I want to appreciate, Meg, your example of the languaging there. I think that's a really great example of switching your words to reinforce that you're the follower, which means basically you're just reinforcing support for the person. And that can also be a nonverbal, right? So a lot is communicated through our bodies. So that's why putting your intention first is really clear. So you walk in to have that conversation. It's not just your words, but it's your energy also communicating support and authenticity. So yeah, great example.
Thank you. And thank you so much, y'all, for writing in these questions. These are great. I just realized I had a follow-up question that we didn't get to when it came to Jessica's question from earlier. Oh, no, wait. Oh, it looks like it was probably way long ago. There we go. Do you, obviously we talked about how you have written a book and you work with companies on these kinds of things. Do you have any kind of recommendations for other books like yours? Anything that might complement your, you know, kind of your perspective on this?
Yes, I do. I have 2 books that were very inspiring from my own book, and I'll just say them and maybe I can, I'm not sure I have bandwidth to type it in the chat, but one is called Leadership is Half the Story. And the authors are Mark and Samantha Hurwitz. Mark spelled with a C. And the second book is called The Courageous Follower.
I'm grabbing your links right here. Yeah.
Yeah. The author is Ira Chalif.
What was the title in the last book?
The Courageous Follower.
All right. Now, all y'all, for ease of and simplicity on my end, I'm sending you all the Amazon link. However, if you are not part of the cult of Bezos, I always recommend that you check out local bookstores. Used books are also always a great bet, just because I'm way into thrifting and in being environmentally responsible. So I'm sending you all those links, but just so you're aware, we're not sponsored, and I recommend you check out independent booksellers. So. And Lacey's also sharing thrift books is a great option. I absolutely cannot recommend that enough. Thank you so much, Sharna. Okay, so we only have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure we are hopefully trying to get to as many questions as possible. We did have another question from Magdalena saying that these skill pairs seem sometimes a bit mixed, or that like they're a little bit more fluid in who takes on what in those pairs. Do you also share this opinion, or do you think that it's less maybe of an organic back and forth or more of something that kind of needs to be established first before it can become organic?
For me, it's very organic. And I think this depends on the team and the organization. My view is that every person is both a leader and a follower, just like every person is a storyteller and a listener. So there's an aspect of us that is, initiating and visioning and directing. And there's an aspect of us that is receptive and kind of detail oriented and supportive. And so these two sides of us can be developed and refined, right? And kind of honed based on the group we're working with, the circumstances we're working in. And so although we have formal leadership roles, right, in an organization, we don't always act as leaders every second of every day. At least I don't think we do that if we're in a healthy team, right? I think that is exhausting. And so what I would encourage is that people look at those skill pairs as kind of twin sets of abilities that maybe you're more familiar with one side or the other, but that you allow yourself to cultivate all of them and to sort of see yourself in action in each of those pairs at different moments of your day. Because of course, we flip between leading and following, in a conversation, in a project, in a meeting. So that's how I see them. And I know that sounds a little bit like, oh, it's one big mess, but it feels more organic once you get used to it. And again, if you reflect on the greatest meeting you've ever been in, or the greatest team you've ever worked on, I guarantee you it's happening already. You know what this feels like. You just maybe don't have the words to describe it, because, we live in a leader-centric universe. But it's there. It is a natural state for humans, I believe.
Okay. All right, so we only have about 7 minutes left. I want to make sure we save some time to talk a little bit more about your book and share with people where they can get that, how they can connect with you. I want to try and get to one more question. This one was very, kind of very impactful and touched a nerve with me, because I have had this situation before as well. This person wrote in saying, I don't fit the stereotype of a leader. For example, I appear very young and unimposing, and I'm from an underrepresented group, which immediately others me in a lot of contexts within a professional capacity. I already have to work extremely hard to win the trust or respect of a team. How can I model this new dynamic of leadership and followership without losing ground with my teams? Now, hopefully, this is something that nobody has to experience, but we all know the reality of the world we live in right now. And a lot of people are still trying to break down barriers or get into rooms where historically they've not been either welcome or, or had the opportunities to join. So if you are somebody who is already maybe at a disadvantage from a leadership, capacity, how should you go about implementing something like this in a way that doesn't continually make your job harder?
Well, first I would say, if you think this is going to make your job harder, then don't do it. Don't use this language, right? Because ultimately the language of leading and following and, whatever I wrote in the book, it's to make your job easier, right? Is to make us have better relationships at work. That is the goal. So I think this is one way to do that. I would never claim it's the only way. But that's the goal. So that's my first response. And then, my other thought is on this question is, I don't think anyone really loves being in that stereotypical dominant submissive relationship, leader follower. I don't think most people really love that. So, when you talk to people about, even if you don't use these words, right, leading and following, or like collaboration, or, working together using the words that make sense to you, what you're offering is a different paradigm. And I suspect, maybe this is too optimistic, but like, I really do believe that most people enjoy that more. It's more satisfying. It's more natural for humans. And so whatever words you choose, let that be your goal, right? I wrote this book to build more trust and respect, not less, right? So, in my mind, using this metaphor of dance partnership, and as a leader, right, seeing your team members as partners, it should make it easier to build trust with them. It should clarify your job as a leader, so that they feel like they also can work with you and not feel oppressed. Like, that's the whole point. So that's kind of my initial thought. Again, I don't think there's a formula here, but if trust and respect is the theme, right, that's coming up, what does that look like for you? I would ask, right? And can you ask for those things specifically from your team, right? And that for me would be like a very leader-like action in this paradigm. Being very transparent about it, like, hey, it's important to me that we respect each other. Like, for me, that looks like this. What does it look like to you? And then, who knows what that looks like to you? Maybe it looks like they get their job done on time. Maybe it looks like they, hold your questions till the end of the meeting. I don't know. But if you ask for those things, then you can track them, right? And then can you do something as a leader to make those things easier for them? Like, if them getting their work done on time is what makes you feel like they respect you, then like maybe there's some sort of structure that you can do as a leader to make that easy, so that you're communicating your support them as well. I don't know. There's just sort of brainstorming. I think this could be this could happen in 1,000 ways, but yeah, pinpoint what it is you're looking for from them, and then ask for that and make it a really transparent process. I would start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to re-highlight, in case anybody maybe didn't catch what you had said initially, the whole point of this is to make your job easier, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you are still in a position where you're still kind of fighting to be taken seriously or to be respected as a leader, maybe what it's going to take is sticking to those more stereotypical or kind of traditional guns, and trying to, kind of establish yourself as a leader in a way that the team recognizes currently, without having to have that paradigm shift, because those can be very difficult for a lot of people, and some people resist them heartily. As someone who used to do that, as a recovering fear of change, I totally get it. So yeah, it might be a situation where you kind of got to hang tight and sit in this role or work the dynamic that's there for now until you establish that trust and establish that yourself as that, that leader, and then kind of introduce some of these things. Because like we've said, these are not just ideas or dynamics to implement in a new leadership or followership situation. You don't have to be starting fresh to be able to introduce this. So yeah, I think, thank you so much, Sharna, for sharing that with us. I know we are short on time, but I want to make sure that we held time at the end here to say thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to spend with us and share with our community. One thing that I want to ask before we go is, where can people follow you? Where can they, keep up to date on what you're doing, check out your book, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, thank you too. I, love talking about this. It's my favorite thing to do, and I appreciate so much all of your attention. Everything that I'm doing is on my website, sharnafabiano.com. The book, Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork, is available anywhere. You can get it from Jeff Bezos, you can get it in thrift books, you can get it in your favorite bookstore, just order it, by name. I also have a podcast where I talk to people about what leading and following looks like in different places. I talk to artists, I talk to working people, I talk to athletes, and that's the Lead and Follow podcast, also available anywhere, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been a really wonderful afternoon. I hope all of our attendees got as much out of today as I did. It was really, really nice to get to know you and talk more about leadership and followership. And thank you to all of our amazing attendees. The questions that y'all submitted prior to today's session were great. I loved all the interaction that we saw in the chat. It always makes these events much more personal and, you know, feel a lot more dynamic. So thank you so much for all of that. And a huge thank you to everybody who's watching us on YouTube, whether you're live streaming it there or you are watching a past recording. Thank you. We are always very appreciative of your participation there as well. Now we are at time, so I'm going to wrap us up here, but I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who joined us. If you are new to Power to Fly, then I really hope that we will see you join us again soon. And if you are one of our returning or frequent flyers, we cannot wait to see you again. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and hope everyone has a safe and happy and healthy work week. See you around, guys. Bye.